The wind howled across the barren Arizona plains, carrying with it the scent of dust, sagebrush, and something faintly metallic. Blood, maybe. Jack Mallory had known this kind of night before. Thunder rumbled low on the horizon, and the rain came down in short bursts, hammering the tin roof of his cabin like angry fists. He sat by the fireplace, sharpening a skinning knife, when he heard it, a sound so soft he almost thought it was the wind playing tricks. But then it came again. A knock. 3, maybe 4, gentle taps, barely strong enough to rattle the door. Jack stood slowly. His right hand hovered near the rifle by the mantel just in case. When he opened the door, the storm gusted in. And with it came a figure, small, soaked, barely standing. It was a girl, an Apache girl, maybe 13, 14 years old. Her long black hair clung to her face, matted with rain and blood. Her eyes were wide, wild, filled with terror. She took a single step forward, then collapsed. Jack caught her before she hit the floor. Her side was soaked red. Bullet wound. Recent. No weapons on her, no shoes. Just a torn buckskin dress and the smell of iron. He didn't ask questions. He laid her near the fire, fetched clean water, stitched the wound, wrapped it tight. She didn't make a sound, not even when the needle went in. Her eyes stayed locked on his, sharp with mistrust but dulled by exhaustion. Jack had seen plenty of death in his time. Union, Confederate, Apache, white men, Mexicans, children. The Civil War had taught him that misery was blind to race. That night, he wasn't a soldier. He was just a man who couldn't watch a kid bleed to death in the cold. He gave her a blanket. She didn't thank him. She didn't have to. Before we go further, if you're drawn into this story of loyalty, danger, and the unexpected bonds formed in the heart of the Wild West, be sure to subscribe now. There's so much more to this tale, and you won't want to miss a moment. Jack sat back in his chair, watching the girl sleep. The fire cracked and hissed. Somewhere outside, coyotes howled into the night. He kept the rifle nearby just in case. He wasn't worried about her. He was worried about who she might be running from. Morning was still hours away, but Jack Mallory knew one thing. By sunrise, the quiet wouldn't last. He looked at the fire, then at the girl, then out into the storm. Something was coming. Jack barely slept. The fire crackled low, casting long shadows on the cabin walls. The girl hadn't stirred since he stitched her up, but her breathing was steady. At dawn, Jack stepped outside. The rain had passed, but the air still hung heavy. He scanned the horizon, scanning for movement. Nothing but the flat, empty plains and the distant outline of the San Pedro Mountains. When he returned inside, the girl was awake, her dark eyes following him silently. She hadn't moved much, but her hand clutched the blanket like it was armor. Jack poured a cup of coffee, then filled a bowl with water and placed it beside her. She didn't touch either. "You got a name?" he asked. No answer. "You understand English?" Still nothing, just the weight of her gaze. Jack sighed, leaned back and stared at the ceiling. After breakfast, he saddled his horse and rode to town. Bisbee was quiet that morning, but a tension lingered in the saloon and general store. Word had spread. Another Apache camp had been attacked down by the Gila River. Jack kept his head down, bought what he needed, flour, salt, whiskey, and asked no questions. Still, he overheard enough to learn that cavalry had been seen near Fort Bowie. Apache blood had spilled again. On the ride home, Jack's mind ran restless. He didn't know who the girl was or what she'd done, but he could feel it in his bones. Trouble wasn't far behind her. He reached the cabin by noon and found it empty. He dropped the sacks and reached for his rifle. A quick search showed no signs of struggle, no blood, just silence. Panic tightened in his chest. Something unfamiliar, something he hadn't felt since the war. Then he saw it. A flicker of movement near the barn. He approached slowly, rifle raised. Behind the hay bales, crouched low and tense, was the girl. Her eyes locked onto his, wide and afraid. She hadn't run far. "I ain't gonna hurt you," Jack said, lowering the rifle. "You could have left." "Why didn't you?" She looked at him, lips pressed tight. Then, in a voice barely louder than the wind, she said, "Nowhere safe." That was the first time he heard her speak. If you're drawn into this story of growing trust and looming danger, make sure to subscribe. Each chapter of this Western saga reveals deeper truths and sharper threats. Jack nodded. "All right then," he muttered. He didn't ask anything else. He didn't need to. She came back on her own, and that told him more than words ever could. That evening, he built up the fire again. The girl sat across from him, still guarded, still quiet. But when he handed her a piece of cornbread, she took it without flinching, and for the first time Jack thought maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone anymore. Jack had never been much of a talker, and the girl seemed to prefer silence. But silence can only last so long between two souls stuck under the same roof. On the fourth evening, as the sun bled into the desert horizon, she spoke again. "My name is Nalin." Jack looked up from the fire, surprised by the sound of her voice. She sat cross-legged, her gaze fixed on the flames. He nodded once respectfully. "Jack," he replied. She didn't smile, but there was a flicker of something. Acceptance, perhaps. Her English was rough, but clear enough. Slowly, over the next few days, her story came out in fragments, words scattered between sips of water or bites of food. Her village had been attacked 2 weeks ago, soldiers in blue coats shouting orders in English. They came at dawn, setting fire to the lodges, shooting the ones who ran. Her brother, Taklish, tried to fight. They shot him in the back. Nalin fled into the canyons, wounded, hunted, alone. Jack said nothing. He just listened. But every word hit him like a hammer. He had worn that same blue coat once, marched under the same flag. He'd believed in duty, in law, in the cause. But now he saw it in her eyes, how wrong it had all gone. The next morning, while Jack chopped wood, Nalin sat nearby, her wound healing slow but steady. She watched him work, curious. When he paused, wiping sweat from his brow, she asked softly, "You fight against my people?" Jack froze. The axe hung heavy in his hand. He stared at the log, then at her. "Once," he said. "Not proud of it." She nodded, no judgment in her face, just understanding. They were both shaped by war, both scarred in ways that went beyond the body. That night, he found her outside, staring at the stars. "Why'd you help me?" she asked. Jack thought for a long time. "Because I was tired of being the man who didn't." If you're drawn to stories where pain becomes understanding and enemies become something more, make sure to subscribe. This journey is only beginning, and the road ahead holds more than just dust and bullets. Over the next few days, a strange peace settled over the cabin. Jack taught Nalin how to use a sling for small game. She showed him how to find water where the ground seemed dry. They didn't speak often, but when they did, the words mattered. Still, Jack couldn't shake a feeling, a crawling sense that eyes were watching from beyond the trees. Tracks near the well, a snapped twig behind the barn. He kept his rifle close. The desert was quiet. Too quiet. Jack first saw them at the general store, a pair of men with hard eyes and worn dusters, whispering to the clerk as they studied a weathered piece of paper. He didn't need to see the details to guess what it was. A bounty notice. Probably drawn by someone who never met the person they wanted dead. He kept his hat low and made his visit quick. But on the way out, one of them glanced up, and something passed between them. Not a word, not a nod, just a flicker of recognition, or maybe suspicion. Back at the ranch, the air felt heavier than before. Nalin had caught 2 rabbits that morning and was skinning them by the water barrel. When Jack told her what he'd seen, she didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't show fear. "They will come," she said quietly. That night Jack sat by the window, the Henry rifle across his lap. He wasn't sure what disturbed him more, the possibility of a fight, or how easily he'd accepted the idea of killing again. He watched the girl sleep, blanket pulled tight, peaceful in the fire's glow. For a moment he thought of leaving, sending her away, letting her escape into the mountains, far from his world of bullets and regrets. But something in her silence had gotten under his skin. She had lost everything, and still she chose to stay. That choice meant something. Before dawn, Jack saddled 2 horses. "You ride north," he said. "Find the water canyon, follow it west, keep low. You might have a chance." Nalin looked up, then slowly shook her head. "I don't run." He studied her for a long moment. The fire had returned to her eyes, not anger, but something older. Resolve, pride. He clenched his jaw, gave a curt nod, and unsaddled the horses. Later that day, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. 2 riders coming fast. Jack and Nalin took shelter behind the cabin. As the riders approached, Jack recognized them. Same men from town. One with a scar down his neck, the other with a revolver that looked too clean for a drifter. They slowed their horses, eyes scanning the property. One of them dismounted, walked toward the barn. Jack's grip on the rifle tightened, but the men didn't push further, not yet. After a few tense minutes, they turned and rode off, only to stop at a hill overlooking the ranch. Watching, waiting. If stories of quiet courage and mounting danger keep you hooked, subscribe now. The storm hasn't broken yet, but it's gathering. That night, Jack didn't sleep, neither did Nalin. They sat by the fire, rifles ready, hearts quiet. Outside, the coyotes cried again. But this time they weren't alone. Something or someone was near. Jack rose before the sun, his body stiff from a sleepless night and his mind sharp with unease. The cabin stood quiet, the fire reduced to embers. Nalin was already up, sitting on the porch with her back straight, eyes fixed on the open land. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. A sudden breeze swept through the trees, stirring the dry grass. Jack stepped outside, scanning the horizon. What he saw made him freeze. 15 men. They stood in absolute silence, motionless, unmoving, positioned in a wide arc around the cabin. Apache warriors armed with bows, spears, and rifles. Faces painted, eyes calm, they made no sound, no movement, just watched. Jack raised both hands slowly. From the center of the line, one stepped forward, tall, lean, his long hair braided tight, his expression unreadable. He held no weapon, just presence. Nalin stood beside Jack, and for a moment the whole world held its breath. She walked down the steps barefoot in the dirt and approached the man. When she reached him, she placed her hand on his chest and spoke in Apache. The man wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight. Jack didn't move. After a long moment, the warrior looked at Jack, then gave a single nod. Respectful. A gesture not of thanks, but recognition. No words were exchanged, none were needed. The warriors broke formation, walking back the way they came. One by one they vanished into the morning mist, as silently as they had arrived. Nalin walked back to Jack, her shoulders relaxed for the first time since she'd entered his home. "He is my uncle," she said softly. "Taza." Jack let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. If that moment gave you chills, you're not alone. The power of silent honor in the face of danger is what makes these stories unforgettable. Make sure to subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next. Jack and Nalin sat on the porch as the sun climbed higher. The threat had passed, for now, but something had shifted between them. Not just trust, something deeper. A bond forged by choices, not words. "You think they'll be back?" Jack asked. Nalin nodded. Not them, others. He nodded too. The bounty hunters weren't done, nor was the violence. But they had allies now, unexpected, proud, and unshakable. For the first time in a long while, Jack felt something stir in his chest. Not fear, not regret, purpose. He poured 2 mugs of coffee, handed one to Nalin. She sipped, staring out into the endless west. Together they waited for whatever would come next. The sky burned orange as Jack rode south, the early morning light revealing columns of smoke in the distance. It rose in heavy plumes over the dry ridges, dark, slow, deliberate, not wildfire, not accident. This was destruction with purpose. He pushed his horse harder. By midday he found what was left of a small homestead. The place had been gutted, doors kicked in, animals slaughtered, the main cabin burned to the ground. A man and woman lay beside a well, their bodies twisted in the dirt. No Apache signs, no arrows, just rifle shells, clean work. And yet, The story in town would say Apache raid. Jack could already hear the headlines. He walked the perimeter slowly, finding a mark carved into the barn's charred beam, a star with a slash through it. He'd seen it before, burned into the stock of one of those bounty hunters' rifles. Back at the ranch, Nalin met him with a glance. He didn't say a word, just handed her a small silver earring he'd found near the homestead. She recognized it instantly. "They kill their own," she said quietly, voice shaking with restrained fury. Jack poured a drink, staring into nothing. "This ain't just about money anymore," he muttered. "They want war. They're trying to light it." For hours he sat outside, staring at the vast desert that had once promised him peace. He thought of the years he'd spent running from his past, his uniform buried in a chest, his medals forgotten in a drawer. But now the fire had returned, not the senseless kind he'd once known, but one with clarity, with direction. That night, he opened the old chest. Inside lay the dark blue coat, folded neatly beside the saber and belt. The weight of memory washed over him, names of men lost, mistakes made, promises broken. He took it all outside, built a fire, and fed the past to the flames. If you believe in the power of redemption and the courage to face the truth, now's the time to subscribe. This journey is no longer just about survival, it's about justice. As the fire burned low, Nalin stepped beside him, holding something wrapped in leather, a bundle of herbs dried and bound with a red thread. She laid it in the ashes. "For the dead," she whispered. He nodded. In the silence that followed, something settled between them. Not peace, but a shared resolve. By morning, the wind had shifted. The smell of smoke lingered, but it carried something else now, intention. Jack saddled his horse again, strapped the Henry rifle to his back, and looked out over the desert. They were no longer waiting. Now, they were moving. They came at dusk, 3 of them this time. Same horses, same dust-covered coats. Jack spotted them before they reached the fence line. No pretense now, just aggression in their gait and the smell of fire behind their smiles. "You've been harboring an Apache," the one with the scar said. "There's a price on that girl's head." Jack didn't reply. He stood on his porch, rifle at his side, calm as the wind. Nalin was nowhere in sight, tucked away, hidden just as they'd planned. "She ain't here," Jack said flatly. The second man, younger, spat on the ground. "We ain't here to ask." They moved fast. The barn caught fire first, an oil-soaked rag tossed through the window, flames erupting instantly. The blaze roared to life, smoke swallowing the sky. Jack lifted the Henry and fired. One shot. The younger man cried out, dropping to the ground, clutching his leg. The others scattered, ducking behind rocks and brush, shouting curses. Jack stayed low, his breath even, the old instincts waking up inside him like a familiar ghost. He moved with precision, not panic. When the smoke cleared, the 2 remaining men were gone. But they'd left a message carved into the door with a Bowie knife. "We'll be back." Nalin emerged from behind the cabin, eyes wide as she took in the damage. The barn was gone, animals dead, supplies lost. Jack sat on the steps, wiping blood from his knuckles. "They're not done," he said. "No," she agreed. "They won't stop." He looked at the ruins of the barn, at the black smoke still trailing upward. He had protected her, yes, but for how long? The law wouldn't protect them. The bounty would grow. The noose would tighten. He needed allies, real ones. That night, Jack packed supplies, strapped his rifle, and saddled his horse. "Where are you going?" Nalin asked. "To find your uncle. If you're drawn to stories where the line between right and wrong blurs into fire and grit, hit that subscribe button. The next chapter turns old enemies into something more." He rode through the night, past dry creek beds and dead mesquite, into lands that hadn't seen white men in weeks. Every rustle in the brush was a question, every distant howl a warning. But he didn't stop. By sunrise he crossed into Apache territory. The land changed, quieter, older. Jack could feel the eyes watching from the rocks, from the cliffs above. He dismounted, held out his hands and waited. Minutes passed. Then from the trees a figure emerged, Tall, silent, painted in ash and shadow, it was Taza, and his eyes burned like coals. Taza didn't move. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, bore into Jack like a blade pressed against the skin, waiting to see if he flinched. Around them, more warriors emerged, silent as the land itself. Bows drawn, rifles ready. Jack didn't raise his hands. He simply stood. "I came to talk," he said. One of the younger warriors stepped forward, speaking in Apache, fast and urgent. Taza raised a hand, silencing him. "You bring fire," Taza said coldly. "You bring death to your own door, then ride to mine." Jack nodded. "They're not just after her anymore. They're burning farms, killing settlers, leaving signs to start war." Taza's jaw tensed. "And why should that matter to me?" "Because war kills your people too." He waited. The silence stretched. Then from the trees Nalin appeared, riding slowly toward them. She must have followed him. When she saw Taza, she dismounted and approached without fear. "He saved me again," she said in Apache, her voice steady. "He fought for me, burned his past." Taza turned to her, and in his eyes something shifted. Not warmth, not yet, but curiosity. Then he looked back at Jack. "You come here without weapon raised," he said. "You leave your land to stand in mine." "That means something." Jack exhaled just once. "I need help," he said, "not to start a war, to stop one. If stories of reluctant allies and honor forged through fire hold your attention, hit subscribe. Because what comes next will test every oath, every choice." Taza didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to the warriors behind him and gave a series of quick commands. Within minutes, a small fire was lit, and men gathered in a wide circle. Nalin sat beside Jack, close but silent. Taza addressed them all in Apache, his voice rising and falling like a chant. Jack understood none of the words, but he didn't need to. The way the men nodded, the way their eyes met his without hatred, it meant he was being heard. Finally, Taza faced him. "We will come," he said. "But this ends in blood," Jack nodded. "I know." That night they camped beneath the stars. No one slept easily. The fire crackled low, and the sounds of drums echoed faintly in the canyons, calls to warriors nearby. Taza knelt beside the fire, carving lines in the dirt with a stick. 15 of us, he said, and no more." "Enough," Jack replied. Under the moonlight, they mapped the terrain. They planned routes, marked ambush points. Jack shared everything he knew about the bounty hunters, their weapons, tactics, greed. Nalin filled in what he didn't know. By dawn, the plan was made. They would ride together, not as enemies, but as brothers of necessity. The ambush was set near Red Mesa, where the cliffs narrowed the land into a choke point. A caravan of Apache women and children had been spotted moving through that path, and Jack knew exactly what the bounty hunters would do: attack, blame it on savage retaliation, and collect more fear than money. But this time, the hunters weren't alone in the shadows. The wind was dry and sharp as they waited. Jack crouched beside Taza atop a ridge, scanning the canyon floor through the scope of his rifle. Below, the caravan moved slow, unaware of the danger. Behind a stand of scrub pine, 3 bounty riders lay in wait, rifles ready, faces smeared with dust and greed. Taza whispered a command. The warriors spread into position, silent as ghosts. Jack's heart pounded, but his hands were steady. The first shot came from the hunters. A warning, then chaos. But this time the trap closed the other way. Arrows rained from the cliffs. Jack fired, hitting one of the hunters clean through the chest. Taza and his men surged forward, descending like lightning. The second bounty man tried to run but caught a tomahawk to the back. The third, scarred, snarling, raised his rifle toward the caravan. Jack leapt down the slope, tackled him hard. The rifle skittered across the rocks. They grappled in the dirt, fists slamming, breath short and brutal. Jack took a blow to the jaw, tasted blood, then drove his elbow into the man's throat. He reached for his own revolver, but the shot didn't come from his hand, it came from Nalin. She stood behind them, eyes hard, barrel smoking. The bounty man dropped, dead. If you've stayed with us through every rising beat of this story, subscribe now, because the next and final chapter will leave nothing untouched. No wound, no truth, no heart. The dust settled slowly. The caravan was safe. Women clutched their children. No lives lost. Not theirs, at least. Taza walked through the field of bodies, stoic, eyes sharp. One of his own, a young warrior named Eshki, lay on his side bleeding from a stomach wound. He didn't cry out. He just gritted his teeth and stared at the sky. Jack knelt beside him, pressing cloth to the wound. Blood soaked through in seconds. Taza approached, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. "He dies proud," he said. Jack looked down at Eshki's face. The boy was no older than 19. "Too young," Jack muttered. Taza's voice was steel. "War does not wait for age." By sunset, the bodies had been buried. The canyon was quiet again, but the silence was different, deeper, heavier. Jack sat on a rock, cleaning his rifle. Nalin stood nearby, watching the sky turn violet. For now, the fight was over. But something inside Jack told him the true reckoning was still ahead. Jack's wound throbbed with every step, the bullet having grazed his side during the chaos at Red Mesa. Nalin walked beside him, steady and quiet. Neither spoke. The silence between them now was not born of caution, but of knowing, of what they'd survived, of who they'd become. Back at the ranch, the ruins of the barn were still there. Blackened wood, scorched earth, but the cabin stood, and they had returned not alone. Over the next few days, Apache warriors arrived in small groups, some to pay respects, others to work. Taza himself came with tools and 3 strong hands. No words were exchanged when they began rebuilding, just sawdust, sweat, and purpose. Nalin moved between them, helping where needed, a bridge between 2 worlds. Jack stood by the new posts being raised and watched the land around him come alive. Where there was once isolation, there was now community. Fences went up, a new roof, a larger fire pit for shared meals. He hadn't asked for this, but somehow it had become his. In the evenings they gathered outside. Old stories were told in Apache. Laughter came easily, and the pain of the past, though not gone, began to loosen its grip. One night, Taza approached Jack as he carved a piece of wood by the fire. "You carry many names," Taza said, "but we give you one now." Jack raised an eyebrow. Taza pointed to the stars. "Kijdashi, walks between worlds." Jack didn't answer right away, but he nodded. It fit. If this journey through fire, trust, and redemption moved you, we invite you to subscribe now. These are the stories that matter, ones carved from pain, stitched with courage, and finished with dignity. When spring came, the land blossomed. Nalin chose to stay with her people, riding between villages as a healer and scout. She returned often, sometimes with stories, sometimes in silence. Jack never asked why. He simply welcomed her. The bounty hunters never came back. Word had spread about what happened at Red Mesa, about the man who stood with the Apache, not against them. Fear traveled fast when it met resistance. One morning, Jack stood on his porch, coffee in hand, watching the desert come to life. Coyotes called in the distance. The air was calm. He thought of all he had lost. Friends, illusions, time. But he also thought of all he had gained. He had not found peace. He had built it. As the wind shifted, he turned and stepped back inside. The fire was warm. The day was beginning. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this powerful Western saga. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and click the video on your screen now to continue exploring more incredible stories from the legends of the Old West. There's always another trail waiting.